Their ideology was hate of incitement to murder, incitement to violence, and that simply was glossed over by the media all over the world. And it was at that particular time that people in Pakistan, under those repressive conditions, did begin to raise a voice. And I remember quite clearly that we were 150 women who decided that we have to now go out in the streets. I wish I had brought some photographs with you to show. 150 women of all shades got together, decided, yes, let's march in the main street of Lahore against Islamization. And before we started the march, we were of course not allowed to, and when we tried to push our way, we were severely beaten. And at that point of time, there was local as well as foreign media, and the news went out and reached the women's organization across the globe. And the reaction was immediate. The reaction of the international community was immediate. And their governments were pressurized, and therefore they were able to pressurize Ziaul to go slow on the women. Not to change his whole oppressive regime, but to go slow on women. So many of us who were arrested, were released, were no longer followed by the police, and that was the go slow that was done for us. We then saw that there was a transition after Ziaul Haq. We had civilian governments, but short civilian governments, because the military, there was an alliance between the military and the fundamentalists. And they had entrenched themselves so deeply that no civilian government would stay. One government came, 2 years later, they were thrown out. The second, third, and the fourth. And finally, we then saw that not only during this while were they throwing out governments, the military had also taken over the electoral process. And they were manipulating the electoral process. Because if you look at all results in Pakistan, which are comparatively free and fair, the religious political parties never come to power. They do rather badly. But it's when they manipulate elections very brazenly and put all the religious parties together, put their heads together, that is when they will get a few seats. Otherwise they fare rather badly. And they tampered with the electoral process. But in the meanwhile, we had, as you know, very recently, another coup. When I say recently, it was only about a decade ago. And the new dictator, as many of you may have seen him, called General Musharraf, now goes around the world giving lectures. I don't know about, perhaps, lessons not learned, I suppose. But he does give lectures, and for many of us who see him, I mean, it is a very unpleasant sight to see thousands of Americans who have paid probably $200 to listen to him sit there very meekly and listen to his pack of lies. And I think that that is the kind of relationship that Pakistanis have had with the international community. Because all our dictators were supported by the US, all our dictators were backed, and all our dictators survived because of the US. So when people ask me, why do Pakistanis don't like the US? Well, it's not that we don't like people living in the US. It's not that we don't like the values that ordinary people, American people have, or that we don't enjoy the same kind of society that is there. But we certainly have a lot of misgivings about the commitment to democracy by the US administrations, not only now, but subsequent ones. But Mr. Bush's administration certainly did take the cake. I mean, he was calling Musharraf, who was a military dictator, the best Democrat he had ever met. And I think only Mr. Bush could talk about a military dictator as the best Democrat he'd ever met. He talked about our intelligence agency as the most efficient. Well, it is the most efficient because they pick up people, they drag people off, disappear them, and they're never heard of. And would you imagine that General Musharraf was portrayed by the international media as a moderate, progressive, intellectual man? And I don't know if any of you have read his book, but please do. A, it's a pack of lies. But secondly, the man has no concept of human rights. In his own book, he admits that when he asked his law enforcement to go and pick up suspected militants, but if you don't find them, he says in his book, pick up their relatives. This is in his own book. In his own book, he admits that he has given suspected militants for hundreds of dollars, so many 130 or something, to the US. And the man has no conception that this is a flagrant violation of human rights. And he openly writes about it, and this is the enlightened, moderate General Musharraf that the US thought was best for people like us. So we think that their opinion about us, we can only retort in the same manner about them. When somebody tells you in a roundabout way, indirect way, that this is what they think of us, it's very indignifying for the people of Pakistan. We just want to come back to September 11th. That is when General Musharraf was in power. But even before September 11th, Pakistan was already experiencing religious militancy. Both sectarian at the level in the country, where Sunnis were killing Shias and Shias were killing Sunnis, where we had an awful relationship with our neighbor. We were being accused of sending jihadis across to India, and much of that was unfortunately true. We were one of the few countries that had recognized the Taliban regime, and it was Benazir Bhutto's government, actually, that recognized the Taliban regime. And later on, she confesses in many of her interviews that she was asked by the military to do it under no uncertain terms, and she was forced to do it. Because there are certain things that military always has in their hand. It is the nuclear, it is foreign affairs, it is relationship with neighbor. And even today, while we talk about transition to democracy, it's a window dressing, but the real shots are still being called by the military. September 11th took place, and I think this is where I do want all of you to come in. When September 11th took place, there was a period between September 11th and the war that took place in Afghanistan. And during that period, who was sent to the Taliban regime to convince them to give up Osama bin Laden? No other but the head of Pakistan intelligence agencies. Now, if this is the wisdom of the Bush administration, that was extremely worrying. Because the head of the Pakistan intelligence was a greater sympathizer of the Taliban regime than perhaps Al-Qaeda itself. And the time of the period between that time and the time of the war, everybody in the frontier area knew that lots of cars have come towards Fatah, they have gone towards Fatah, lots of militants have passed through that place, but it is inconceivable that the people who are in charge of Pakistan pretended that they didn't know. And Fatah is not an autonomous area. Fatah is the most controlled area in Pakistan. It is controlled by a political agent. It is ruled by the governor, directly by the president. And nobody can interfere in the Fatah except the military. I've been to Fatah several times before September 11th. And believe me, that every time I've gone, and it's not just me, anyone, the political agent has known how long I have stayed, whom I have met, what I have eaten, what has been talked about. But they did not know that thousands of cars came, but they did not realize that Fatah was being overrun. And Fatah is not